We have a brief introduction by Professor Klein Rosenthal about the workshop. If you would please take the floor.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Klaus. And hi, everybody. It's really exciting to see you all here. So the workshop in sustainable development has been delighted to work with the Piermont Waterfront Resiliency Commission this semester. And I want to just start out by thanking the students who have overcome many challenges of Zoom, different time zones, and not even being able to meet as a team, but they've risen to the challenge. I also want to thank Klaus and Nathan, especially for your generous sharing of time and ideas. The challenge posed to the students, I thought, was deceptively simple at first. How do you finance resilience? We know with coming sea level rise and sea level rise that's already taken place, we're facing immense flooding challenges in the future as extreme weather events are projected to increase the number as sea level rises in an accelerating fashion. This is over time, and on a beautiful sunny day like today, you barely think about it. But what we found is planning in advance always helps. It always saves money. So I want to thank everybody for attending. So many of you actually, including Sylvia, Usha, have generously shared information and time with the students. A couple of meeting conventions, please, if you're not directly speaking, keep your mic muted because you never know when you're going to get the doorbell ringing or telephone call. And I believe the students want to go through their presentation initially and hold questions for the end of the presentation. Is that right? So if everybody's seen the agenda, we have until about 1:20 for their presentation, which leaves us a good solid half hour for discussion and questions and answers. And we are very grateful again at Columbia University to have the opportunity to address this challenging questions. The students also had to learn everything about the language of flood hazard mitigation and the acronyms of the federal government in taking on this challenge, and they've done that exceedingly well. So I want to pass the opening mic to Klaus at this time to frame it from the PWRC's perspective, and then the students are going to present their work. Then we can have a discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm sort of the interlocutor between the PWRC and Columbia here. I have a foot in each terrain. So it was nice to be a matchmaker between these two communities. But I really want to thank everybody from Piermont, whether it's the PWRC or other village government members, for really pitching in on this effort, which is very important for Piermont's future. I really have to shout out in particular Nathan Mitchell, who tirelessly and very skillfully has the PWRC navigated through challenging times, and I think it will come to the benefit of Piermont's future. This happens to be actually the third of 3 academic exercises. The first was 2 years ago with Cornell University's so-called CAT program, the Climate Adaptive Design Studio. The second was with the Spitzer School of Architecture of the City College of New York City. And this is the third. And when Professor Klein Rosenthal approached me, I said, "Oh, Joyce, we don't need another design studio. We had already 2. Piermont needs money to implement some plans. Let's stop doing all those plannings." And she said, "Okay, so let's have a studio, how to get funding." So here we are, and let's see what the students came up with. I'm as curious as probably anybody else. Sarah, back to you and the team.
So we're just gonna take a minute to set up the presentation slides. Sorry about that.
Want me to share now?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, I want to make sure I have the right presentation here. It's Piermont Climate Adaptation Finance, final presentation.
Yes, final client presentation.
Look right? Okay, could you just mute me so I don't bother you during your presentation? Professor Joyce, if you could do.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Good. Okay.
Sounds good, Sarah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we will be presenting our workshop project, Coastal Resilience, Climate Adaptation Finance and Planning for Piermont, New York. We welcome our client, the Piermont Waterfront Resiliency Commission, PWRC, of the Village of Piermont, and our client liaison, Dr. Klaus Jacobs, Science and Strategy Commissioner. Our team comprises 5 students, Henry Chang, Michael Chong Castillo, Bradley Wong, Anthony Perez, and myself, Sarah Rapp. Oh, I believe these may be the wrong slides. Sorry, I I can just share the slides. I think that would be best. Sorry about that. So our areas of research are grants and funding programs, planning and resilience strategies, and potential future outcomes. The report compiles information on financial mechanisms on the federal, state, local, and private levels in the form of grants, loans, bonds, and grant collecting bodies. In addition to climate adaptation financing, we examine strategies related to promoting a sustainable and resilient Piermont through nature-based solutions, amphibious architecture, and managed retreat. Within this financing framework to the right, for resilient growth, our objective falls in identifying future financing scenarios and the adaptation gap. Improving Piermont's resilience also corresponds with Sustainable Development Goal 11 of sustainable cities and communities, making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. If the target of holding global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius below 2 degrees Celsius of pre-industrial levels is missed, flooding from sea level rise could cost 14 trillion worldwide annually by 2100, with Piermont potentially incurring tens of millions of those damages.
Thank you, Sarah. Piermont faces threats of flooding from heavy rain, storm surge, and sea level rise. It sits along the Hudson River and is downhill from Sparkhill Creek. Even in fair weather, factors like low atmospheric pressure along the coast can cause flooding. Risk and vulnerability assessments suggest that the damages to structures alone over the next century could cost up to $200 million or more if steps are not taken to mitigate these threats. Almost the entire village is projected to be inundated by 2100, with many of its main streets and coastal residences inundated as soon as this decade. Piermont is representative of thousands of shoreline communities, especially along the Hudson River estuary, that will need to deal with similar flooding and sea level rise issues, but are struggling to access sufficient government funding. Next slide, please. Piermont faces challenges in multiple dimensions, 2 of which are local and national. On the local level, Piermont's constraints are, firstly, that it has a small economy of scale, with a population of roughly 2,500 people. They also have tight budget constraints of less than $6 million with no money allocated towards climate adaptation projects. They face relocation challenges with the small landscape in which they occupy. In addition, there are barriers to regional and intermunicipal planning. Lastly, they are put in a position where they have to focus on short and medium-term planning. On a public level, however, there's a lack of federal, state, and local funding for flood mitigation projects. On top of these financial constraints, there's a lack of proactive and pre-disaster funding for infrastructure. Next slide, please. So in order to supplement our research, we interviewed experts, including academics and professionals that work and study in areas related to building coastal resilience, including the likes of Professor John Shapiro of the Pratt Institute, Professor Ann Siders from the Disaster Research Center at the University of Delaware, and Dr. Elizabeth English, founder of the Boyne Foundation Project. Since we cover an array of financing mechanisms and projects, these interviews have enabled our team to focus on our research and identify relevant case studies that have successfully implemented flood resilience projects, all of which have informed our recommendations. I will now pass my time along to Anthony.
Thank you, Bradley. Now we will summarize our results, beginning with financing programs and mechanisms. Included as a supplemental material to our report, the funding tracker is a table that has included most of the pertinent grant programs that are available to build flood resilience. The team has identified these grants and their relevance to the Piermont community. First, grants are some of the most important avenues of receiving funds for large-scale projects. Some of the largest grants are administered by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, otherwise known as FEMA, in the form of Building Resilient Infrastructure and Community Grants, Flood Mitigation Assistance, and Flood Mitigation Grant Program. The National Coastal Resilience Fund by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is integral for building natural coastal resilience. The program's focus is to invest in restoring and strengthening natural systems so they can protect coastal communities from the impacts of storms, floods, and other natural hazards. This specific grant and others grants like it usually require a one-to-one match in funding, although note that this match could come in form of in-kind goods and services, such as external partner services and volunteer opportunities. Finally, grants awarded by foundations like the Nature Conservancy can be directed to the Piermont Civic Association, an NGO, that can act as a financial conduit for funding from these sources. Insurance. The National Flood Insurance Program enables homeowners, businesses, owners, renters, and participating communities to purchase federally backed flood insurance. It's the nation's largest single line insurance program, providing nearly $1.3 trillion in coverage against flooding. In post-Sandy, Piermont's total NFIP building claims were over 3.1 million. The community rating system is a voluntary incentive program that encourages floodplain management activities by providing discounted rates for properties that reduce flood damage to insurable property through a comprehensive approach to floodplain management. Piermont is currently applying to participate in the CRS program and is expected to reach a 10% reduction in flood insurance premiums for participating households. Now moving on to loans, the Small Business Administration loans can benefit private homeowners, renters, businesses, and NGOs that are along the waterfront and in affected areas. With low interest rates and long maturity periods, these loans can provide immediate relief in post-disaster scenarios to repair and replace damaged real estate and private property. The Clean Water State Revolving Fund is primarily used in water quality infrastructure projects, but they can also provide loans for natural estuary conservation or stormwater management. They offer flexible financing options in the form of debt purchases, guarantees, and loans that have interest rates as low as 0%. A successful resilience project funded by CWSRF occurred in Ohio, where approximately 1.1 million low-interest loans were awarded to residential development companies that bought a large land tract in the Big Darby Creek watershed. The company then designated a housing project along with green infrastructure for an environmentally sensitive and financially profitable situation that repaid these loans. Sarah will go ahead and explain the bond market next.
The bond market is the largest capital market in the world and is an underutilized market for climate change solutions. The Reserve Mother Nature Bond Act, which was proposed this year in Governor Cuomo's State of the State address in January, would enable municipalities to apply to receive revenue from the State Act for flood resilient infrastructure, water protection, and habitat restoration. It is yet to be announced if the act will be campaigned for in the fiscal year 2022 budget, but this will likely be made public in next year's state address. It funds many different areas of design, planning, site acquisition, and construction, and many project types have very high budgets. For example, $250 million of the total bond revenue will be allocated to buyout projects across the state. The Bond Act is also a part of a $33 billion state mission to fight climate change over the next 5 years. The governor's office is also considering partnering up with the Climate Bonds Initiative in the near future to establish a green bonds market in New York and California. This would expand the market and potentially open a state funding stream for municipalities to apply for green project funding. And this initiative is a global certification scheme that ensures investors that a project is green and in alignment with the Paris Climate Agreement. The organization has an adaptation and resilience expert group to develop their climate resilience principles, which is the sector that Piermont's projects would fall under. Lastly, we look at impact investing, investments that generate a measurable, beneficial social or environmental impact alongside a financial return. As a model, environmental impact bonds can match investors with municipalities planning environmental and resilience projects. An investor provides upfront capital and shares the project risk. In one case study, we examined the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which issued environmental impact bonds to fund stormwater management and resilience projects in Hampton, Virginia, in Chesapeake Bay. The Green Infrastructure Environmental Impact Bond is contracted by investment advisor firm Quantified Ventures and also funded by a one-to-one grant from an anonymous donor that is being matched in part by 2 other foundations. So this type of bond could be issued through a foundation-sponsored collaborative body across the Hudson River, or New York State could potentially implement it in its future plans. And next, we are going to overview collaboration and cooperation. Joint agreements as an administrative solution could intermediate a grant commission or body that has potential to provide more revenue generating opportunities. This endeavor could save Piermont and cooperating towns time, money, and increase access to grants and other funding. Intermunicipal cooperation can be coordinated by an outside organization. Riverkeeper, a nonprofit devoted to protecting Hudson River communities, spearheaded a collaborative project known as the Hudson 7. The Hudson 7 is a group of 7 communities that joined together to protect their Hudson River water supply. In May 2019, they signed an intermunicipal agreement to form the Hudson River Drinking Water Intermunicipal Council. Together, they improved water infrastructure, fought for water protection planning, and conducted community education. Collaborative efforts like these are also expected to make the 7 municipalities more competitive for grants and other support associated with New York's $2.5 billion Clean Water Infrastructure Act. This is an amazing case study of how cooperation between municipalities can be extremely successful. However, cooperation also comes with obstacles. Piermont would have to collaborate with communities that are administratively feasible and sensible, like municipalities in Rockland County, neighboring municipalities, municipalities of a similar economic scale, but also municipalities that have similar flooding issues, engineering needs, and geographic features.
Thank you, Sarah. After we identified the different sources of funding, we looked at resilience infrastructure projects like green infrastructure solutions, amphibious architecture, and the option of managed retreat as well. For the estimation of costs, it should be noted that there is a lot of variance due to different labor costs geographically, as well as the issue of different project sizes in case studies. As you can see, the cost of elevating a single house in the United States can range between $19,000 and $194,000. Furthermore, it would depend on how much the house is being elevated. For floodproofing, it would depend on which strategy is being chosen. Dry floodproofing prevents flood water from entering the house, while wet floodproofing allows some flood water in, but minimizes the damage done to the house. FEMA advises not to use dry floodproofing in areas where flood water exceeds 1 meter. For our medium-term strategy, the United States Army Corps of Engineers estimates that it would cost an average of $353,000 for relocation, These estimates include labor costs, building a new foundation, special permits, etc. For flood walls, they generally cost millions to build per kilometer, and they could hinder the process of marshland migration. As such, the team had a greater focus on nature-based solutions instead. As for the long-term strategy, coastal marshland restoration costs approximately $67,000 per hectare. For the Piermont Marsh, the DEC already has plans to reduce erosion in and along the marsh, and they plan on restoring it with native vegetation. On amphibious retrofits, their costs range from $9,500 to $97,000. Again, these ranges are a result of comparing costs in different case studies. Next slide, please. Coastal resilience grant programs often favor nature-based solutions since existing natural features may already provide protections from coastal threats. For example, the tall and dense Phragmites in the Piermont Marsh had significant wave attenuation effects during Hurricane Sandy. A recent research project called the Piermont Marsh Storm Protection Study by Dr. Sheng from University of Florida estimated that the presence of the Piermont Marsh had helped avoid close to $1 million worth of property and losses. Our main focus for this section is to try and find grants that could implement nature-based designs that have already been recommended to the village. The Piermont Living Shoreline project by Climate Adaptive Design Studio from Cornell University, shown below, illustrates the different adaptive strategies that was recommended. It proposes to use native marsh vegetation along the pier in a terraced design for wave attenuation. Some areas will also have a gradually sloping revetment with a vertical seawall at the top to reduce the impact of storm tides. Additionally, porous concrete reef balls will be used for further wave attenuation. By using these reef balls, the structures can also recruit native suspension feeding organisms to minimize impact on the ecosystem. The area in yellow is a buffer zone for recreational and educational purposes. It would have a kayak launch and have educational signages describing the benefits of the Living Shoreline project. The cost to advance this conceptual plan to final design and permitting phase is approximately $442,000, with a one-to-one matching from the National Coastal Resilience Fund by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. There would be $500,000 to cover the costs. The benefits of this shoreline project extends beyond protecting property value for homeowners, as there are added environmental values such as carbon sequestration from the marsh and protecting the biodiversities, all of which are invaluable assets for the future. Next slide, please. The designs that I had just mentioned mostly deals with wave actions during weather events. Other nature-based solutions can also help with stormwater runoff or like extreme rainfall events. These include porous pavements, rain gardens, and bioretention areas. Currently, Piermont has already implemented 2 rain gardens, one at the Tappan Zee High School and one at Piermont Public Library. However, there is a need to acknowledge the limitations of these green infrastructures in relation to tidal floodings with sea level rise. According to the study by Dr. Sheng, even with the marshland, flood damages from storm surges and sea level rise is likely to have an equal property loss effect by 2050. As such, the nature-based solutions need to be accompanied by other adaptive strategies to continually build up Piermont's resilience. I will now pass the time on to Michael.
Thank you, Henry. Managed retreat is a strategic relocation of structure or abandonment of land to manage natural hazard risks. The direct benefits of managed retreat are threefold. First, it shelters properties and homeowners from the hazard zone while reducing flood damages to properties. Second, managed retreat reduces population density in the floodplain, which allows for the third benefit, a natural buffer zone where solutions like flood mitigation infrastructure such as nature-based solutions can regenerate flood protection. The image below illustrates these points. Next slide. A resilient Piermont will require its public officials to change the way they view their parking lots and green spaces. To encourage this redesign, our research team has identified 2 viable plots of land that could support future relocation efforts in Piermont if secured. Next slide, please. The first site area is the Tappanzee Elementary School lot. The total land area, excluding the school's administrative buildings and classrooms, is estimated to be 200,000 square feet. So it is therefore large enough to accommodate residential housing, host multiple businesses, and or condominiums. This is a safe location in which coastal and stormwater flooding will not be an issue. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, go back. The map on the left shows that approximately 4 83-unit, 1 to 2 bedroom condominiums can be constructed within the school's parking lot and green space total area. And the map on your right shows that approximately 34 1,000 square foot single family homes can be constructed. It's important to note that the maps you see here reflect only 2 land use options. The land may be better utilized by serving a combination of mixed purposes. For instance, one of the 4 condominium complexes on the left could instead be a public plaza with a market and or a community garden. Village officials will have to decide the best combination to maximize space and its benefits. Next slide, please. The Piermont Community Center, unlike the school's parking lot and green space, falls within the medium risk category of future sea level rise projections and may become more vulnerable to flooding in the future. Therefore, future development plans must consider sea level rise and build accordingly. But as you can see, the site is large enough to accommodate several structures and is relatively safe. Perhaps in the future, this site could be fitted for amphibious structures, such as a floating community center that would bring residents and visitors to a waterfront that would be otherwise considered unsafe in the future. By eliminating parking spaces and repurposing that land to serve resilience efforts, Piermont will be better situated to make better use of its space while bringing its people and assets to safety. Over and above that, repurposing the proposed sites to serve Piermont's future resilience efforts is one way for village leaders to look beyond FEMA-supported buyouts. And now I'll hand it over to Anthony.
Yeah, so now we'll begin to explore potential future outcomes and opportunities for the Piermont community. Apart from the 2 locations that Michael just identified, we are also looking at the opportunities of retreating inland. Both Valmeyer, Illinois and Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin provide perfect case studies for successful managed retreat efforts. Each used disaster relief funds to relocate their assets and homes away from flooded river streams. In Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin, there was population and economic growth after they retreated because of the access to local highways, which created land use regulations to promote solar power. And this was back in 1979, so kind of a visionary solution back in those days. As new businesses and people arrived there in Soldiers Grove, the town became to be known as Solar Town. And in Valmeyer, Illinois, there were record floods that were in 1993, which inundated most of the village for months. 200 homes were significantly damaged. The village of Valmeyer used funds from the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, along with some state funds, to acquire 242 properties, and an additional 92 structures were acquired with the NFIP. To completely mitigate the threat of flooding, the entire village relocated 3 miles away to a bluff overlooking the site of the former village. So you can see that pictured on the bottom right with the green dots, the relocated village. The acquisition project moved quickly, and within 2 years, nearly the entire old village had been acquired and demolished. And the old site is now dedicated to open space. It is used for recreation, farming purposes, and most residents now live in the new village. New structures include residential homes, commercial and industrial structures, school buildings, churches, public offices, most of the vital infrastructure of the town. One of the town's local officials was quoted as saying, "Moving was not just about fleeing floods, it was about breathing new life and new opportunities." So it's kind of more of an inspirational perspective on managed retreat efforts for community relocation. We're encouraging the idea of communal assets like churches, community centers, communal spaces, leading by example and encouraging residents to follow. And this preserves like this identity, this cultural identity within a community. There are two community relocation regions we consider. One is retreat to state land, and the second is to neighboring inland municipalities. So in coordination with the Palisades Interstate Park Commission and the state legislator, Piermont's land would potentially be acquired by the state in exchange for relocation into previously state land. This option may become more feasible in the future as managed retreat becomes more of a widespread practice among communities, especially in New York. And when local lands in Piermont are exhausted, like the ones that Michael had mentioned, the community could turn to these municipalities like Orangeburg or Tappan to coordinate community relocation. They could consolidate local government operations with neighboring inland towns, so Piermont residents can begin to move, and we encourage these to preserve local sources of revenue generation as bodies move together, neighborhoods move together. If communities would like to begin to merge or begin these ideas of community relocation, the next step would be to start dialogues among surrounding inland communities to begin to see how these relocation options can be viable in the coming decades. Bradley will continue to discuss amphibious retrofits.
Thank you, Anthony. Considering Piermont's symbiotic relationship with the waterfront, our team believes that amphibious architecture is a judicious choice as a visionary solution. Firstly, it's important to define what we interpret as a visionary solution. So we are making recommendations for amphibious solutions to occur in the case of Piermont undergoing a comprehensive rebranding approach or a rebuilding phase in response to an extreme weather event. With the uncertainties Piermont faces in light of sea level rise and extreme weather events, it is astute to have contingencies to mitigate these threats. In the next couple of slides, we will explore two schools of thought associated with amphibious solutions. The first school of thought in question is the idea of amphibious retrofits. Previous slide, please. Best described by Dr. Elizabeth English's work. Dr. English, the founder of the Boyne Foundation Project, interprets amphibious solutions via hybrid conditions, i.e., the weight of a structure is partially supported by both land and water simultaneously. On the bottom left, we see Dr. English's amphibious retrofits realized, and on the top left, we see how amphibiation provides flood protection without significantly changing the building's appearance. In the case of a flooding event, the amphibious mechanisms will allow the house to float like a ship, whilst its foundations remain rooted to the earth. Her work demonstrates the effectiveness of amphibious foundation retrofits that have helped mitigate catastrophic flood damage, whilst preserving neighborhoods and their culture. The direct benefits of these structures are as follows. Firstly, they are reliable during flood events. They are less disruptive to the natural landscape, therefore enabling a greater sense of open space and accessibility. These structures are also priced at 2 to 3 times lower than permanent static elevation retrofits, as discussed earlier in our presentation. According to Barker Architects, a company who has built amphibious homes, building a modern amphibious home currently costs about 20 to 25% more than a similar sized conventional house, a small price to pay for a sustainable and resilient future by the waterfront. In addition, Dr. English estimates amphibious retrofits to cost about $100 per square meter. However, these estimates are relevant to properties with less grounded foundations in Louisiana. Lastly, as FEMA prioritizes the relocation of residents away from vulnerable areas, amphibious retrofits are a prudent choice. Next slide, please. Now, we will explore the second school of thought, that of the Dutch ideals associated with amphibious living. With an approximate quarter of the 17 million population living below sea level, the threat of sea level rise and extreme weather events is discernible. Therefore, Dutch architects have pioneered an avant-garde architectural movement that has encouraged incorporation of amphibious and floating technology into waterfront properties since the late 1990s. The elements of their designs are not dissimilar to the engineering designs of Dr. English and revolve around the same principles. In this case, simple structural designs can transform properties to combine luxury, sustainability, and resilience into attractively modern homes, which synergize this relationship between the land and the water. In this case, we explore 2 case studies, Maasbommel and Eiberg. Maasbommel, on the bottom left of your screen, has 32 real amphibious houses and 14 floating homes, of which their success was proven in a 2011 flood event. where water levels in the river mast increased to a level that caused amphibious houses to float for the first time. Built to resist flood waters as high as 5.5 meters, it is estimated that the cost of these amphibious buildings cost an approximate $322,000 to $386,000 for a 1,290 square foot home. On the other hand, on the top left of your screen, we see Eiberg, a symbol of the Dutch architecture community. It is a place projected to offer 18,000 homes for 45,000 people and create around 12,000 jobs. Through this example, we can see how the rebranding of Eiberg as an amphibious community has created an economic bubble that has thrived. With the asking prices of houses within Eiberg starting at about $500,000 up to about $1.8 million, we can see the prices are not too dissimilar in Piermont. Although Piermont is a fraction of the size of Eiberg, we can see how rebranding as a sustainable and resilient community with amphibious elements could lead to significant economic inflow, albeit at proportionate targets. The metered success of amphibious communities in the Netherlands, in locations which face similar environmental challenges to Piermont, make our team believe that this could very well be a solution for Piermont to at least consider. We can see the notion of amphibious architecture in the form of retrofits and designs has clear benefits for waterfront communities like Piermont. With the inevitability of sea level rise and extreme weather events, it is important to put forth mechanisms that can mitigate the resulting floods which these events will cause. As shown by the case study in mast bombing, investing in the construction of amphibious living spaces could ultimately prove to be more cost efficient than recovery efforts after a flood. In a personal communication with Dr. English, she said that whilst FEMA's impediments mean that the construction of new homes in flood-prone areas of the US is unlikely, she reiterated that if a particular community had the exigence, desire, and financial backing to become an amphibious community, they could indeed circumvent FEMA and become an independent community supported by private insurance companies. I'll now like to pass my time on to Anthony to conclude.
Yeah, to restate, our research goal was to identify funding opportunities as well as long-term cost-efficient projects and mechanisms to increase Piermont's overall resilience. We recognize that there is not one solution that will build flood resilience for communities like Piermont. Working within the current framework of national flood mitigation programs and assistance in Piermont's conditions, a timeline like the one above on the next slide can help project what the future of the community could look like. In the present day, using current funding avenues through pre- and post-disaster grants, which will fund programs like buyouts, retrofits, and nature-based solutions, by the year 2030, we hope that these infrastructure developments will begin to pay off as the community continues to adapt. With flooding events and sea level rise becoming an imminent threat by 2050, retreat and amphibious living can propel communities like Piermont toward visionary solutions that reimagine how we live and work along our nation's floodplains and coasts. And with the new federal administration in the next 4 years, we will see what opportunities lie ahead for coastal resilience funding and programs. Thank you so much. And now we welcome any of questions and thoughts. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to open it up to questions. Thank you so much. Well in time too, really intriguing, and I'm sure there's many questions. So I think a good way to handle this is if people unmute themselves when they want to speak. Everybody pretty much knows everybody here, I believe. So I see that Usha and Steve, you can also raise your hand or add a question to chat. I'll be happy to read them.
So I can go ahead and say it.
Please.
Can you hear me? Okay. First of all, congratulations to all of you. Really very, very nice presentation, very clear, very focused. So I know it's all the people involved, and I imagine this remote setting has its own challenges. So really, really congratulations for the job well done. I had a question about two examples that you talked about. One was in Wisconsin and one was in Illinois. My question was, what are the policies that drive government actions to help those communities? So for example, in these two cases, since it's already happened, were you able to identify whether it was socioeconomic status of the communities or environmental justice issues, or some potential tax base. So if you can just shed some light in that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so just a little bit more information on those two cases. I think these communities were more of a like working middle class communities, but these were both instances early, well, like in the late 90s, and this was almost what now 20, 30, 40 years ago. So in this situation, these two towns were able to kind of collectively get the community to relocate, because I think some of the issues we've seen in other communities that do not have this collective relocation is that they lose their tax base. As some residents decide, voluntary buyouts through FEMA, you lose some residents here and there. So that's, I think the key to those two case studies was that it was really sort of like a uniform effort from the local governments encouraging the community to find solutions to first find a location that's really great to preserve community, but also instigate growth, like we said, population growth, economic growth in both instances. So those were the key takeaways, but that's, so I don't know if that's really answering your question, but yeah, let me know.
Yes, it does.
Okay, perfect.
I think follow-on question, just really quickly. I'm sorry if I cut off you, Steve. Just really quickly, was that a FEMA funded buyout in Illinois and Wisconsin, Anthony?
Yeah, so with the hazard mitigation grant program in Illinois, yes, that was it was coordinated with that and some state funds, and as well as it's now no longer available, but I think the NFIP used to acquire buildings, and so I noted that, but it's no longer available through NFIP. But yes, it was FEMA.
Thank
you. Mm-hmm.
Steve, please.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you all. That was excellent. It was very helpful and well done. Since we have several village board members on this Zoom meeting, I wanted to throw something out basically to them. I agree with the comment that about the relationship between the village and the river. And I think that's one of the reasons why there would be some resistance to relocation, even though that's certainly a valid approach. We talked about Amphibious a number of years ago when we did the initial study after Sandy. And of course, Amphibious has its own problems because a lot of people think it's crazy and whatever. And I'm just wondering for the board members, and I know this wouldn't work 100% because there are a lot of small lots adjacent to the river, but if the village board was to modify the zoning to allow greater density for people who put in amphibious housing, that might encourage some private investment in amphibious housing. And then once that got rolling, even if there was just a few locations, that might encourage other people to do it and might even help us get funding from other sources to do it. So I'm just throwing that out as a thought.
And anybody should feel free to respond to that, including guests, please.
Yeah, okay, I guess I can respond to that. So, Mr. Silverberg, the issue here is that FEMA prioritizes buyouts, and basically, long story short, they don't allow for the construction of new houses like in flood-prone areas. So what they do to do this is that they hold back the NFIP from insuring these areas. So that is why in my section, I suggested that what you mentioned is a possibility. And even if you rewrite these zoning laws, yes, you can create amphibious housings, but you will not have the support of the federal government. So yes, it will have to be a private project.
To that point, this is Usha. I was under the impression that there was a program under FEMA that they would pay to relocate in certain from certain flood zones the properties to elsewhere, provided the local government, in this case, say Piermont, would agree to take that land and turn into a community use, not for building purposes, but whether it is park or, just a public use. Did you come across that program anywhere at all?
So I did not quite come across that. So in the literature that I read, it said that basically we had an interview with Dr. Elizabeth English of the Boyden Foundation Project, and she did mention that she worked really hard to get FEMA to even accept the notion of supporting amphibious retrofits. So she said that she worked for 7 years before FEMA allowed amphibious retrofits for houses in flood-prone areas. I'm sorry, I did not quite come across what you said though. Sorry.
Well, to
Yes,
respond to
Usha,
that,
the FEMA does support the reuse of land by a municipality for a public purpose, such as open space or park.
Right. So yeah, so a part of my incorporation of the parking lots and green spaces, a lot of FEMA's grant programs have like this mixed use, publicly beneficial use baked into them. So yeah, it definitely would be in Piermont's favor, to have their development plans include some community base.
yeah, and we have also come across grants that turn previous bought out land into a green space or community space. Mark, please.
Okay, so I'm a big picture kind of guy. So I do want to compliment you on this presentation. I noticed that you're recording it. One thing is, do we have access to this recording?
We will make a link available to everyone. It may take a few days, and since it's a holiday starting this week for some of the people who work with that, it may take into even the first week of January, but it will be available.
I think that's a very crucial thing because, as Steve pointed out, having a mixture of the PWRC and people from the village is a very critical thing here. I noticed that Rob has left the meeting for some reason, but I think the whole Board of Trustees needs to see this because I see this, as I say, from a big picture, that there's some very important principles in the way you approach this that I would like to highlight and talk about. First of all, the idea of money being available has something to do with the projected losses, and if we could do things to mitigate it and save money, there's always that save against losses. This is an angle that makes us feel that it's not quite so hopeless. And there are obviously a lot of people that are looking for investment in areas that can grow, and you show us how it can grow instead of slowly floating away. Also, I liked one of your things was you didn't just talk about money, but you talked about visions, future visions of how Piermont could look. And that's why I think it's crucial for the village trustees to see this, because we have to envision a future, not so much house by house, but where we're going to be and how we're going to survive. And so, you talked about projects that started in 1993 and in the 70s. We have to think of what's going to, 10 or 20 years at least, we have to think where we're going to be. I like the way you threw in, there's been talk of moving up to the elementary school, but seeing it as a viable thing and a necessary thing that we have to start working on now is very important. It's not something for the far off future. It's something to get started on now. Welcome back, Rob. Good to see you.
I've been fighting with, can you hear me?
Yes.
I've been fighting with Amazon for 5 months because I keep losing my internet, and they're outside working on it now. So I don't know
Okay.
what they did, but
Okay, good. I'm glad you're here. So I was talking about how the village has to really envision a new future 20 years down the line and start working on it now, whether it be the elementary school, whether it might be swapping out state land with Tolman Park and making the waterfront of Piermont a park area and making new buildings in Tolman Park or something like that. I like the idea that you talked about the collaborative process. So you did talk about the Hudson 7. I want to know, is Piermont part of the Hudson 7? No.
No.
Okay.
No, Mark, stop a minute. We do not have our own water supply. That's Suez. We do
Oh, yeah.
not have control our drainage and sewage. That's the town of Orangetown.
Oh,
So we are without control of our infrastructure utility wise, which means a whole nother municipality would have to be involved with us in order to be part of that compact.
okay. Thank you for that clarification. But the concept that up and down the Hudson Valley, there are many riverfront communities that are facing the same issues and that there's power in numbers. I hope collaboration could work together, or it could end up being a competition of who's going to get the scraps. Yes, Sylvia?
Again, Piermont is a member of the, it used to be called the Learning Group. It's all called the Flood Resiliency Network. And we are partnered with a number of municipalities along the Hudson or coastal areas. Some are not on the Hudson. And we're working to look for sustainable programs and sharing ideas of how to fund them and possibly long-term cooperation.
So I guess that's the group that we met up in Tolman Park and we went around.
Correct.
Right. So I'm saying that's one of our strengths that we should build on. And I like that idea. And, you know, we do have this 93 Piermont, which is something the PWRC is looking at how it might construct on that area that's kind of flooded out. And the ideas of using hybrid or on stilts, and this thing is something that we may, if this person who wants to build something on this property, maybe we can get them to be a showcase for one of these strategies of creating a waterfront type of housing that is different from anything we've seen before. And let me see.
Mark, while you're thinking, to answer your question about the school, we've looked into possibly purchasing the school. One of the questions is in their deed, is it a restrictive deed where it can only be used for educational purposes? But the one thing that that came to mind today with this excellent presentation is that maybe even if we couldn't get the school, maybe we can get that green land next to it and use that as an area of relocation without having to purchase the school also. So I think that's something that we can look into. The other problem is that people that live, you know, in those beautiful houses along the river, how do you convince them to move, you know, move up off of 9W into a piece of property up there?
It's better for them to be convinced by us than by the river.
True.
Right. So again, yeah, go ahead, Klaus.
Yeah. Just a moment, Mark. I think it's for the lawyers to look into what it means that there's a deed about the educational aspect. I think the whole project of relocation could be a public education project.
Yeah, I'd like to comment quickly about that. I did look into it, and there is a standing stipulation that if the property were sold, it'd be for educational purposes. But I think that's more of a legal apparatus and something that could be worked with or worked around. Now the school is there, and I think if any development like Klaus suggested would have, you know, it'd be best to incorporate some, you know, some education, whether it be, you know, a connection to the community center, you know, on shore, you know, by the shore, or possibly, you know, the school serving some function, beyond the elementary school at night. So I think that stipulation can be worked around, especially if the property were to be leased as opposed to be purchased. But that's definitely something that Piermont needs to look into, and I think it's more of a legal issue that can that could help or hurt Piermont depending on how much education emphasis is in the laws.
So this is Usha, and I have two quick questions. Are you saying in that particular scenario that if the community and the local government, Piermont trustees, if we all got together, coordinated, and identified the land, whether it's the school or the next adjacent one that Mark was talking about, that strengthens our position to get FEMA to help us? Is it basically the tenet?
Oh. No,
okay.
The only way to really do this, because we've been looking in it for years, is to think we should condemn it. It's the only way we're going to get it. The school district has been adamant. The cowboy fields, they're adamant that they are they're controlling it. I think the board of trustees needs to look at condemnation. It's done in other municipalities. And if we don't do it, we're sitting in years and years of talk. We've already had about 10 years of talk with them. So where are we? Let's condemn it.
Well,
who pays for the condemnation? Where, the rest of the village?
I think that's where we would have to work with state legislators and ultimately with this bond issue that the governor is only proposing at this point, not yet realized. So, I mean, I think Piermont can try to do it all on their own, but I think it would be wise to coordinate with all levels of government on that. By the way, we are still in Mark's time, but...
Okay, let me just finish up then.
Can I ask Michael?
Go ahead, Steve, you go.
Sorry, Mark.
Good, no, Steve, go.
Michael, you said you looked into it. Do you have, by any chance, have a copy of that deed that has that restriction in it?
Yeah, I can forward it to you.
That would be great if you could forward it to the folks on this. Thank you.
So I'm going back, I'm going to finish up. So first of all, I am glad that I'm stimulating conversation. And that's because, and one of the things I've heard as a theme in talking about a lot of issues, first of all, I hear, Rob, you're working on this one, you're working on that thing. There is always different obstacles and resistance to every idea. So you look at the people who are down by the water. They're trying to preserve their particular investment. What is in it for them? And then you have people on the hill, and you have everybody. If there's these political issues and the legal issues. So what I'm saying, and we've been talking to the PWRC about how we're going to present the Shang thing of what's the future of Piermont going to look like, and his predictions and how we're going to show it, and if it's going to be threatening to people, and somebody had to move out of here and everybody heard that they were in trouble and the value of her property went. There's always going to be stories because change is hard. Resistance is going to come from a lot of places. I think the only answer to resistance is to come together and to join together in one vision. And it's political, but everybody from the people down on the river to people up on the hill to the people in the town that are threatened with flooding in their businesses and our infrastructure of the community, all have to come together behind a vision of what it's going to look like in 20 years from now and get started on it and find out what's in it for each segment of the population and how we could transition them to the next vision to do the best they can and get together on this. There's always somebody's got a problem, but we have to do a rebuilding from the ground up and You know, if you're on the hill, you have waterfront view, water view. Water view is something you don't. And if you're sitting on stilts in the water, there's something beautiful about that too. We might have to start building a few bridges from here to there so we can get in and out. But that's part of the vision. We did the CAD project with Cornell. We saw many different visions, and we have to look at some of these things and commit to it as a whole and present it to the community where we're going with this, have a bunch of, you know, meetings and stuff and talk to different groups and form a coalition. And there's a lot to talk about. So I kind of threw out all these seeds and you could all water them and it's all yours, guys.
Amen. I just want to remind that, for instance, there was a community in Staten Island that had asked for years to be bought out. The city did not want to have any part of it. And then Sandy came and the city still didn't want to have any part of it. And they went to their state legislators, both on the Assembly and the Senate side, and they in turn went to the governor and said, take a chunk of the state money that you got from FEMA to buy us out. But it was the consensus that led to the solution. There were 2 or 3 out of more than 100 property owners who insisted to stay. My guess is that they bitterly regret it because the services that they have now are zilch, okay? So I think
Klaus, I just
consensus building.
Okay, Klaus, I just want to add to this what you're saying. It's a perfect example. But one thing I recall, and perhaps you can too, is they had a tremendous support from a legislature at the state, New York State. And they attributed.
That came later. Okay. But they got it right. But they went out for that support. It didn't come to them. They changed it.
So I think that, to me, I mean, it always struck me when they give credit to that line of communication, that we, you know, with the board of trustees and so forth who are on this call, that we have to kind of start looking at what we can do with the state, county, and state to build that partnership. As Piermont alone is, I mean, we've been talking about it, I think, since 2013 that I know of, this discussion about relocation, buying property, and all that. And so here we are 7 years later and maybe longer, but I have never seen a county or a state representative being drawn into it and, you know, frankly, doing what they did for Staten Island.
Let me just briefly say, in 2014, I took the mayor to Senator Carlucci's office to see about sending up a bond issue for coastal resiliency issues. He thought it was a great idea. It went nowhere, but it involves a long-term sustained communication and campaign. So when you drop it, it goes nowhere. But our new Senator Elijah, I've worked with in NIAC, and I think we need to go to him immediately and see about the New York State Bond Act to come in when we take eminent domain. If we have the state of New York saying, yes, we're behind you because you're going to do 1, 2, 3 things that this bond act covers, I think then getting through the courts will be much better, and or the school district will finally give in.
Glad to hear that from you, Sylvia.
And having a vision I think could help get funds, because you say, this is what we want to do, we're all behind this, and then you find your funding sources to fit that, and then you keep pushing and pushing till you get it.
Mark, totally agree with you, but to that point,
we're going to be working on a comp plan. We're updating our codes.
Yes.
We have a vision. It's very comprehensive. It's very complex, and we understand the costs and the needs. So we're ready. We need a consistent board of village trustees, directive, and constant communication and follow-up. Can't be one phone call a year and then disappear. It has to be us and our elected officials staying with it week after week. until it's done.
And getting the community
Ditto.
behind it. That's the key, because the village and politicians respond to the community's needs. We need education and outreach. Usha?
I was just going to say, everything Sylvia said, I agree with, and what you said, Mark, but we kind of did that. We took the Cornell plans. We had all the communities, I think you were integral part of
Yes.
that, come and say which parts they liked. And I think the next step was really to combine and put together in a plan.
Yes.
Which is what Sylvia is saying. We have a plan. So I think they're almost there. We just need that political will that goes, you know, the village and above. So yeah, I think the foundation and the work by Columbia kids, I mean it kindly when I call you kids because you're very young, is great addition.
If I may, just to follow up Sylvia's point, you can also work with your congressional representatives, because in the new Congress, they might have an experiment with pilots with managed retreat. So we don't really know what funding might become available. But we can...
Yeah, it's a shame Nita Lowey is retiring, because our congresswoman was head of the Appropriations Committee. We have a new congressman coming in who's never served any kind of, you know, regional or national office. So, and his seniority is pretty, yeah, but we'll be talking to him.
Thank you.
There is just before the House, as part of the Clean Water Act, a new initiative that actually would allow for climate change adaptation. And I think we have to get our congressmen and senators, the two of them, on board with this damn thing, and then slice a little bit off for New York, and if we are lucky, for Piermont.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is a good time, because I don't want to steer the conversation away from this critical point, but I really appreciate that the workshop team envisioned the amphibious relocation and retreat, kind of recommended a medley. And I did want to understand amphibious architecture fully, because I've envisioned, say, communities like Iborg, as kind of floating tethered homes. Bradley, so if you can speak to the design. So they're tethered by utilities and they can rise and fall. But I know we're talking also about amphibious retrofits. And in your intriguing diagram, I think it may be from Professor English, there looked like buoyancy materials. It almost looked like straw bales. And so is the amphibious retrofit literally, instead of putting a home on stilts, it's creating buoyancy? You know, leaving the foundation in place, but taking everything above it up.
It sits
Okay,
normally on the ground. Oh, sorry, you go.
Yeah, so basically with the amphibious retrofit, so I was reading one of the papers Dr. English wrote, and so she works with lower income communities in like Louisiana, and so part of the retrofits is that, for example, one of the examples they use, I think it was like it was only like $4,000 or something. And then they put like 400 like drums underneath the foundations of the house. So the only thing I had issue with for the amphibious retrofits is that it's hard to find like an example or a case study that is relevant to Piermont, because I think the houses I'm not sure, but the houses in Piermont are probably more built to the ground. They're more grounded with regards to their foundations than these houses in Louisiana, for example. So that is one of the limitations of the amphibious retrofits argument. With regards to like the nomenclature regarding amphibious communities in the Netherlands, I think it falls, I mean, yes, it does have certain hybrid conditions where it's connected on land and in water. Dr. English Dr. English prefers to call it more of a floating solution, but I still believe that the fact that, you access the location via land, even if it is built on the waterfront, still means that it can be an amphibious solution in the end.
Thank you. And Klaus, you were going to add a point to that.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is more to get the utilities, the building codes, and all these regulatory constraints lined up. I'm sure O&R wouldn't know what to do, or our building inspector wouldn't know what to do. What would be a solution that guarantees not only during on the ground sitting conditions, but when this thing starts to float up, how to make all these connections of utilities safe, and the proper regulations probably don't even exist. So neither on the state level, and so Piermont would have to be sort of marching ahead of the state, as far as I know. And that's another reason why we would have to work with our legislators to make sure that the state actually gets these regulations.
That's a positive, because we could be the model community, and maybe that'll bring in funding.
Exactly.
Steve?
I mean, the thing, Klaus, along the lines of what you're talking about, is based upon the Uniform Fire and Building Code. The state regulates construction requirements for things like utility connections and so forth. So we'd have to either get the code to be amended or get a waiver for Piermont to do those things.
Yeah, but I mean, this has to be
vessels.
addressed. It can't be sort of an afterthought. It has to be foresightedly taken into account.
There's a community in Ballard in Seattle, in the Ballard neighborhood, which is a bunch of houseboats, and the way that they're regulated there is that they're treated as boats. So I was asking the question about utilities with the amphibious homes, because that's one of the issues there. They actually have a sanitation truck come to the dock and pump out retention tanks in order to deal with sewage, and that's a kind of a difficult thing to do, and is dependent on the access from the roadway and so on and so forth. So I think there is a way that we could allow them right now by classifying them as boats that are on shore, but it would require things that people might not be that interested in, like having the sanitation truck come to your house and pump out your basement.
But do we get in trouble with the state coastal management zone regulations and stuff like that?
So then if we're trying to treat it as a house, which there isn't any stipulation for. So you're allowed to have boats, and if there's water, if you're on the waterfront, you could bring your boat on shore and not break any rules. But yeah, I mean, we would have to explore it further. I just thought it was really great to hear that the cost of building new homes as amphibious was significantly less than static elevation. And Mark had mentioned 93 Paradise a while back, and I think that that's an excellent argument to be made to that property owner, that it costs you a lot of money to put it 10, 15 feet up in the air. What if you just did it so it was amphibious, and when the flood came? And honestly, I would love it too, because the former home on that property was actually built on a barge. So it would be very, it would be a very nice package in my mind to say, and now we've built another houseboat on this property that always needed a houseboat. But the other thing I wanted to mention was there was discussion about intermunicipal agreements, and I'm not sure, probably the students from Columbia aren't aware of things that are going on in the county right now, but just a week or so ago, our neighbor to the north, South Nyack, had a referendum and voted to dissolve their village government and just be folded into unincorporated Orangetown. So we haven't seen exactly what that's going to look like yet. But I think that, so there has been some discussion going on in the local community about, is this something that, Piermont should look at doing? And I'll be the first one to make the argument that if we get folded into unincorporated or Orangetown, our priorities with these kinds of issues will not be something that we can make the top priority for all of Orangetown. So we have some sort of defensive benefit of staying as our own municipality, and that can then direct our energies towards finding solutions that don't affect the rest of Orangetown the way they affect us.
So, hey, Nathan, to your point about having a kind of a boat, people living on a boat, so to speak, with sewage being pumped out. One area that I'm familiar with is Sausalito in California. And it is like miles and miles of docks with boats, very nice boats. It's a, by the way, fabulous view of San Francisco Bay and the city. But here's the catch. Because it is not on a land, there is no property tax that can be paid. And the minute you get that boat, you are already into, you know, not increasing the value with devaluation of your property. Now, for an amphibian home, there must be examples of how they get around the tax situation for a municipality tax base.
I bet the village could pass laws that make boats taxable.
I'd just like to speak on that. So when I was doing some of like my research, there's actually this place in New Jersey called, I think, Sea Marina or something like that. So basically they're the only place in New Jersey which allows like these houseboats in particular. So these houseboats are like attached to the dock. And they also suffered a lot from Sandy, basically rendering the whole community useless. So that is something that you have to consider with the notion of a houseboat, because if the dock itself is not a solid structure, then the whole houseboat system will not work in the case of an extreme weather event. Yeah, so that was one of the things that I noticed when doing the research about amphibious solutions. So you got to be like careful about it. And also in Iberg, for example, that like floating community, I saw some pictures where like tugboats were literally bringing a house from one location to the other. So it's still a house, it's not a boat, but it's a house that can float and be towed wherever it needs to go. Ultimately, I believe that amphibious solutions are definitely an interesting idea, although it may seem a little bit dystopian. But I think that the main things which are facing communities which are considering amphibious solutions, for example, in the US, are definitely the federal government in the form of FEMA, and FEMA trying to prevent people from building in flood-prone areas, prioritizing relocation instead, by withholding the NFIP, basically. So it's going to be hard to do anything in light of this, which is why Mr. Silverberg said that, you know, potentially attracting private investment is probably the most judicious way forward. And I completely agree with that.
I have a question about the utilities on the amphibious homes, specifically the wastewater management. Just now, we mentioned that the boats will come and pump from the retention tanks. Would those boats fall under the management of Village of Piermont or like the Orange County, Rockland County?
Would be a private expense to the property owner. It's basically like if you have a porta potty on a construction site, you have to pay the truck to come by each week and pump it out. It's just a big version of that. So you would have to, and that's not necessarily a problem, but as Sylvia mentioned earlier, we don't control our own sewer district or our stormwater management. That's all done by a larger municipality.
Yep. And so on that, wouldn't the village be able to use like the Clean Water State Revolving Fund to like kind of govern the wastewater management and potentially charge the residents?
I know that the companies that do the actual transportation of the sewage material have a bunch of permits that relate to, you know, clean water protection and regulations about if there's a spill, the reporting they need to do, the containment they need to do, and that sort of thing. But I'm not really an expert in it.
Thank you.
But I think it doesn't have to be that solution where a contractor would come in to take the waste away. If properly engineered, and again, probably in the absence of proper regulations on that, that may be not an easy one to do.
marinas, Klaus, are regulated.
Hold on, just a moment. But I don't see a reason why there should be not permanent installation with flexible connections to dispose of the sewer, just like for stationary houses. Sorry, Sylvia, go ahead.
Yeah, marinas are under state obligation to clean out, and you're not allowed to dump into the Hudson River, and there are grants for marinas to get the machinery to pump out these, whatever they are on boats. So a marina contractor could do this, but I think Klaus is right. The connection to land makes a lot more sense. And there are these sewage trucks that Orangetown has that can go in and clean out manholes. They can clean out sanitary sewers by that huge funnel thing. It sucks it out. And they have the capability of cleaning out retention tanks. So, it's in the, it's already done in Orangetown. So we could do it if we get that far.
Great. It's 1:53, and I'd like to, at this point, given our agenda for today, invite the students if they would like to make any concluding statements and reflections. If anybody has a very burning question, this is also probably the time to ask it for a final question for the students.
I have something I want to say to the group, but maybe it'll be best served after the students go. So let the students go, and I'd like to speak after that.
Great. Sarah, Anthony, Henry.
One comment I would like to make is, Nathan, I didn't know about South Nyack. That's a really interesting progress that's been made, and I will certainly look that up and incorporate it into our report.
I just want to say that I think my biggest takeaway from some of the interviews that we had with these professionals and academics and with Dr. English is that they're also excited to be a part of this dialogue that we're all partaking in right now. And many of them were like, please follow up with, what's happening in Piermont. Especially Dr. English is interested in seeing how, amphibious retrofits might work in the United States, where currently, we have these federal structures that don't allow for, regeneration in the floodplain. But, certain things can change legislatively or, through lobbying or whatever to convince that this is like an actual viable solution. Instead of retreat, we have a combination of retreat, relocation, and retrofits to begin living along the floodplain. It's super exciting to see where this could go. And it was inspirational just to get that kind of feedback from the professionals that we were interviewing. So I wanted to share that.
Thank you. That's great. Michael, Bradley? Michael and Bradley.
Yeah, so I think one of the main takeaways for me was that, researching amphibious solutions was my research area. So I really tried to find ways, to visualize how Piermont could possibly use it. And I think that Piermont is actually a perfect place because it's by the waterfront. And it seems from what everyone has said that, they love the waterfront and they don't want to move. So if that was the case, this seems to be the most judicious decision because it incorporates living by the waterfront in a resilient and sustainable manner. And also, these retrofits are not that expensive as well. I don't have exact numbers and I'll still continue to find them, but even the construction of an amphibious house is only going to be 20 to 25% more than a conventional house in the first place. And I think we also have to look at the notion of mitigating the effects of the flood versus spending a lot of money trying to recover from the flood. So that is what amphibious solutions allow us to do. As I indicated in one of the case studies I used in Maasbommel, the thing was that the community was actually created, the amphibious houses were actually built quite a few years before. And it took like many years for them to have a flood event where it proved that the amphibious solutions actually work. So that happened in 2011, and the houses basically floated on the water as predicted. Also, the thing with like these amphibious solutions, and in the case of flood events, is that like people like Dr. English still recommend that in the case of flood events, people still have to relocate somewhere else in the meantime. But when they come back home, their places are going to be A-okay. Thank you. That's it from me.
Thank you. Henry and Michael?
Yeah, I have something to say. I think the hardest part for me and for the team was to balance, especially with the paper, you know, with our report, balancing academic writing and scholarly approach with this more, you know, on the ground, practical, like real world example. And that was something that was hard to navigate. But I think we were able to bring them together. And we'll definitely see once we get, you know, comments and response from our final report. And secondly, one of the things that I found interesting was the fact that Piermont has so much to offer as a community, and it's unique in its own respects, but many other communities will have the same problems that Piermont has. And for me, it's like, why can't New York State see that Piermont, you know, is a microcosm of what needs to be done in other communities and even in other states. And so, you know, I'd like to be able to ask, you know, state leaders what their priorities are and what their attitudes toward Piermont, you know, towards Piermont is, so that, you know, we can get a better understanding of you know, where they fall, where Piermont falls in on, you know, on their list of priorities. So for me, access was a difficult thing, you know, not only, you know, at the state level, but at the municipal level, especially with COVID-19 restrictions, you know, and us physically not being able to, you know, visit Piermont, I think put us at a real disadvantage. At least for me, you know, I wasn't able to go and visit the sites that I looked at, you know, so that was something that I wish could have been different. But yeah, I hope to see Piermont in all its glory once this is all over.
Excellent. And Henry, I think you had the last reflection for the team.
I think that the Village of Piermont, by the way that the people pushed back on the DEC's plan on the herbicide, was a testament of how the residents can come together. And now that they're including the new Piermont Marsh Storm Protection Study in the new management plan, I think that's just amazing, considering how the American government works as compared to my home country. We don't really have a say. And I truly see the American way of freedom and rights is being exercised by everyone there. And I understand that resilience planning is not based off a one-time event, and it's supposed to be over 100 years, over long term, and like managing daily threats. So I just think that everyone's doing a great job and trying their best to mitigate already.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Sorry, I'd like to add on a little bit more reflection since mine was quite short. But I think that, you know, we spent a lot of time grasping the complexity of every single topic that we were looking into, that we didn't really get the chance to really explore, like the collective action and local political issues that could arguably be the biggest impediment to moving forward for Piermont at the moment. So I hope that our report can be a useful tool to share, to show to other board of trustee members, and I hope that it can be used in your journey to make local political changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to let Klaus make the final statement, but before I do that, I want to thank everybody from the village that is attending today for allowing us, as Sarah just pointed out so eloquently, to share in your journey and dealing and grappling with the complexities and depths of the resilience issues in terms of water needed for Piermont. I wholeheartedly agree that creating a vision and then finding your way to that vision through different paths is a really strong way to do that. I also want to, I'm not sure how applause is done on Zoom. I'm learning. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's little reactions. You can press, there you go. So I want a minute for everybody just to applaud the students, because you did grapple and take a deep dive very creatively into very complex issues, and you managed to pull out of that a very cohesive vision and set of options with information that's very practically useful for Piermont. So excellent work, and really glad that you provided this information to Piermont. Let me just add that the student final report is coming this week, excuse me, well before Christmas. And now I would like to also give, yes, Mark?
Okay, I happen to be the Educational and Outreach Commissioner of this PWRC, so I'm going to take my moment to say some things in terms of how this project went. I also come from the field of education. And so first I want to thank Klaus for making this arrangement, this marriage between Columbia and Piermont. I want to say to you, Dr. Klein Rosenthal, that I've been watching you, and you have had a smile on for most of this, and I know why. And you have a team here that has all taken their individual areas of research, put it together into a project. They've worked as a team. It's a real world thing, that problem they're dealing with, which is going to give them a lot of experience towards their eventually working in the real world. So it's a wonderful experience. The fact that when you engage with your presentation, which is just a PowerPoint and a discussion with the community, and you've generated so much conversation and discussion of vision for the future, and it's very relevant what you've given us, and it's inspiring. And I am hoping that as we move on to creating this vision, making it happen, there are still so many experiences that are going to come up in trying to go from the paper to something cohesive in a community to something where we could turn it into activism. Is a process, and maybe if not this group, to another group, that we could keep up some kind of relationship with you, and to your benefit, and we're certainly benefiting from what your students have done, and we should keep this thing going, and I applaud you and your team very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it'd be a privilege to continue this conversation. I know planning takes time, takes consensus and discussion, and the students have really started started a conversation that was clearly ongoing with Piermont for many years, but contributed to it greatly. Thank you so much. That was very kind. And with that, I want to ask Klaus if you would like to make a final statement for the meeting, and we will be providing the report and a link to the presentation, and definitely look forward to follow up. Thank you, Mark.
Well, my statement is thank you, thank you, thank you, both on the student side, Joyce, you, and those folks from Piermont that really pitched in. I don't want to say a sentence more. I actually would like Nathan, as the chair of the PWRC, to say a few words.
Throw me right on the spot like that. All right. Okay, so I mean, I really enjoyed watching this process unfold, and I didn't get to spend as much time with the team as I would have liked to because of just life being as it is. So, you know, I really think that this is a terrific direction to go in, and the information about ways that we can think about funding and ways that funding really is not an independent thing from that vision are terrific, are things that we need to hear right now and are going to feed very well into what we endeavor to do in the next year, which is create a new comprehensive plan for Piermont that incorporates these resiliency measures and brings the whole community together to build some kind of consensus about what the future looks like. And I mean, my personal vision has always involved a certain amount of development of the TZE campus. I was really glad to see that this was something that was looked at in the project with real world estimates of actual number of housing units that could be situated there. That's a metric we haven't looked at very closely before. We've seen pictures with multiple squares in an area, but describing it in terms of 4 independent condo buildings with 83 individual units in each of them, that's a big number, and that's an increase in population. That's a growth of Piermont, not a, you know, contraction of Piermont in the face of the sea level rise stuff. And that's exactly what I hope to deliver to the residents of Piermont as a vision, is that we can grow through this. This is not something that's going to overwhelm us or overcome us, but we need to lay the groundwork now. So I think that the timing on this project was really excellent, because it does happen to correlate with us looking to start this comp plan process, which is going to be a community inclusion event, which is going to be something where we hear from all the stakeholders, including businesses, including political leaders, and where we also hear from people that don't think it's a great idea. And we learn a little bit more about this conversation that we were having a little today. I like living on the waterfront, you know, 330 days out of the year. It's just those other 30 days I don't want to deal with right now, but I don't want to go live up on the hill where I can't stick my toes in the water anymore. So having some kind of flexibility to the, you know, different interests and priorities and risk tolerances for residents in Piermont, I think is going to be an important part of what we end up with as a final comprehensive plan project.
Thank you so much. So wishing everybody a happy and healthy holiday. We will be in touch this week, and thank you. Stay safe, stay well. Oh, and last but not least, I wanted very much to thank Mark Goldman for his contributions in teaching assistant. And Mark, yay. I think we have to applaud everybody, and I hope it's a very restful, enjoyable, and fun winter break that everybody has. I hope you have time for a holiday. So thank you, Bradley, Henry, Michael, Sarah, Anthony. Excellent work. Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.